on.
There you go.
Why don't we start with the, okay, got you. Exclusive poll, overwhelming majority says the U.S. faces a mental health crisis. And you might recall we started our class last week talking about just the prominent individuals from the entertainment industry and the sports world who came out with dealing with extreme stress and anxiety, including Rabbi Stephen Leader of Wilshire Boulevard Temple, who devoted an entire sermon on Yom Kippur to dealing with lifelong anxiety and panic attacks. So this article came out in the USA Today, and it corroborated what I've been feeling for the whole year. An overwhelming majority of Americans believe the U.S. is in the midst of a full-blown mental health crisis, according to a new poll, USA Today poll. Nearly 2 years into the COVID-19 pandemic, which brought a rise in depression, anxiety, stress, addiction, and other challenges, almost 9 in 10 registered voters believe there's a mental health crisis in the nation, the poll found. Now, this is not only for extreme mental conditions in terms of psychosis, but I think it also includes neuroses, such as everyday stress and anxiety. It just went way up. And especially in young people. We saw so many reports of high school students and college students dealing with the stresses of having to learn online and all of that. So this article really went into detail about just the pervasiveness of anxiety and stress and other disorders, primarily caused by the pandemic, which, as we all know, has affected all of us. All right. So let's continue. Let me get my notes up here. All right. We all know the symptoms. Our blood pressure starts rising, our breathing and metabolism speed up, and blood starts flowing rapidly to our arms and legs. There's a discernible tightness in the shoulders or a clutching in the chest that then constricts breathing. Thoughts of gloom and doom are often accompanied by knots in the stomach. We shut down. We focus solely on our individual predicaments. Our vision gets very narrow. This is the body's physical response to stress and anxiety. Some of these responses are based on actual external events that involve fight or flight responses to danger, the survival mechanism that we inherited from our ancestors, and that is a positive response to anxiety. But many of them are not based in reality. The vast majority of these moments of anxiety and stress are false alarms. In truth, we are not under attack, but our bodies don't know this. They produce real symptoms that result in negative effects on our mental and physical health. According to some medical experts, between 60 and 90% of all our population's visits to doctors' offices are stress-related. Most of us worry far too much about far too many things instead of reserving worry and the body altering effect of fight or flight response to crucial matters. Jewish life without worry? That seems impossible. However, when we explore sources of Jewish wisdom, we find tremendous spiritual resources that can act as an antidote to stress and worry. That is what this class is all about. Utilizing the teachings we will introduce through this mini course, we will find pathways to a life of faith that can help us with the stress and anxiety we experience living in the modern world. By replacing fear with faith, we can nurture the calm center that will heal us in the midst of life's unrelenting demands. Last week, we talked about Mitzrayim, the narrow places that constrict or enslave us, that keep us down and hold us back from discovering the spark, the hidden light that each one of us possesses. We talked about the limits of traditional psychotherapy as opposed to a more spiritual approach, what we call soul psychology. That spark, that hidden light within each one of us is actually our soul. And now I'm going to go back to our text. What would you do if you weren't afraid, by Michal Oshman. And by the way, did anybody order this book? I had a couple of inquiries after the class about the texts we're using. Anybody order the book? Okay, that's fine. So let me just read this one excerpt. And I'm going to try not to. I think I read a little bit too much last week, and maybe didn't allow for as much participation from you. So I'll try to be. I'll try to watch that a little more this week. So anyway, here's a teaching from the Tanya, which we talked about is the Hasidic text that is the source of a lot of Jewish wisdom. The soul is comparable to the flame of a candle, which by nature continually flickers upwards, because a fire's flame is naturally inclined to detach itself from the wick. And even though, by leaving its wick and uniting with its source, the flame would be extinguished and would cease to shine at all down here, nevertheless, this is what the flame is naturally inclined to do. So that there's that spark that's inside of us that's always trying to break free. And this was the second idea that we talked about last week, the Neshama. Instead of trying to get rid of our stress as traditional therapy attempts to do, we must learn to accept our stress, which is a normal part of everyday living. And so that flame within us, that spark that we feel, that we know is something positive that's inside us, despite the stress and anxiety we feel, that flame is our soul. And Jewish wisdom teaches us that we don't need to get rid of the stress and anxiety we feel. We just have to learn to go with it, to accept that it's part of the human condition. If we could just learn to go with the flow, so to speak, we would be much better off. A good analogy would be the waves in the ocean. Instead of allowing them to knock us down, we must learn to float with them. So I have a number of steps that we can do, because the word neshama for soul is the same word for breath. And if you recall, when we looked at the creation story, that God created Adam, but to give him life, he blew into Adam's nostrils to give him the breath of life, which is also ensoulment. So when he gave Adam a soul, he gave him breath. And that's why the same word in Hebrew, neshama, means both soul and breath. So in times of stress, we should focus on the breath. The importance of deep breaths and being attentive to the breath as it enters and leaves the body. So breathing is very important. And I have a little confession to make. Nobody really knows this, but and I don't tell anybody, but I suffer from insomnia. I'm not a good sleeper. And I'm sure some of you, as we age, sleep gets a little bit more difficult. And I think really all my life, I've suffered from performance anxiety on the pulpit out of a fear of not being able to sleep. And it's been terrible. Every year before the high holidays, I would just have a panic attacks that I would be holding the Torah in front of the ark, in front of hundreds of people, and I would pass out in front of everybody because I didn't sleep the night before. I was on sleep medication for years, and I finally gotten off of it this year, or I'm trying to. But one thing that I've noticed that's been a tremendous help, especially when I've had a bad night, I'll wake up early at 5 or 6. I can't really go back to sleep. I get up, I do some work, and then about an hour later, I'll go back to bed, and I will do deep breathing. I will just try to get as many deep breaths as I can. And even if I don't fall back asleep, somehow I feel refreshed. And it does something. It's like a form of meditation, because many people have told me that when they meditate, they feel rested when the meditation is done, whether they've actually fallen asleep or not. So I can't overemphasize the importance of breathing, deep breathing, whenever we feel anxiety and stress. And, Rabbi Miller does this almost every week during Shabbat services. If you go to services, he'll tell you sit up straight in your chair and close your eyes, take deep breaths. And he kind of does a meditative introduction to the service, and that is to help us relax. So I'm sharing this with you because I want to just convey that the neshama, the breath, is really a excellent way to deal with stress and anxiety, and it just works. Step 2, instead of trying to push away anxious and stressful thoughts, just accept them as part of you and let them take you where they want to. So, we fight the stress, we fight the anxiety. I don't want to feel this. I shouldn't be feeling this. And the point that the author makes, and that I think you'll hear often from spiritual counselors, people who meditate, and let your mind take you where it wants to go. And if you're feeling anxious, feel that anxiety and let it wash through you until it dissipates. And it will dissipate. I think the more you try to push it away, the more it stays with you. So eventually the thoughts will pass and you'll be able to focus on more positive thinking. The word for breath in Hebrew is neshama, which also means soul. Remember that connection exists between the two words, which we made last week. Remember that the human soul is in effect the breath of God who breathed life into Adam. There are two other words for breath in Hebrew, which all correspond to aspects of the human soul. Neshama, which is soul or life breath, ruach, which is spirit, and nefesh, which is another name for soul. Simply noticing the breath can return us to the present moment, dissolve tension, and free us from the fear of what is to be. There is a prayer in the morning service, Elohai neshama shenatata bi tahorahi. O God, the breath or soul you have given me is pure. So when we practice noticing the breath, we realize that we are not as fully in charge of life as we might imagine. Life is bestowed upon us at every moment. It is a miracle that our breath enters and departs and re-enters without our planning and directing it to do so. If we practice sitting in silence every day for a few minutes and simply direct our attention to the breath, we will be more apt to remember the breath in a moment of anxiety or stress. We can always return to the seat of the neshama, the soul breath, and find a source of regularity and stability amid the at times overwhelming demands of our lives. Focusing on the breath reminds us that we have bodies as well as minds. And let me just stop right there and ask, have any of you been practicing breathing as a way to reduce stress? Okay, Randy, you want to share a little bit about how you use breathing? You're muted. If you could unmute yourself.
Sorry, got it. Okay, I have an autoimmune disease, and sometimes it makes me very stressful. And if I sit and take deep breaths, then I refocus and can go ahead with what I need to do. Also, I did text everybody, I message everybody. You mentioned Rabbi Miller's meditation at the beginning and somewhat in the middle of his services on Shabbat morning. And that is really helpful to me. It makes me centered and focused. So you mentioned it. So I thought I'd reinforce that it does help.
It's a great thing. I mean, I've been to a lot of different services over the years, and I've not seen anyone do that on a regular basis like Rabbi Miller, and wonderful. It just helps everyone kind of just move away from the tensions of the week, and spirit of Shabbat, and to relax. That's wonderful. All right. Thank you for sharing that.
Okay, you're welcome.
Okay, so remember that. Remember breathing as a way to not only relax, but to help to, it can really reduce a sense of tiredness from a lack of sleep and make you feel refreshed. All right, let's see. Sometimes it seems that our scattered and frantic thoughts, our lists of obligations and self-criticisms, our running commentaries that agitate and frazzle the mind are the sole reality of our lives. And remember, we talked a little bit last week about how our thoughts dictate our reality. If we're positive, we have a good day. If we're negative, we're not going to have a good day. And I really do believe that rather than the external things that happen to us, it's how we respond to them, how we react to them, and our thoughts really control our emotions, our behaviors, our feelings. It is important to remember our bodies and focus our attention less on how they appear to others and more on how they feel to us. Are we tired? Do we need to rest? Are we thirsty? Can we breathe into the pressure in our neck and shoulders? Can we allow ourselves to feel the tightness in our jaw or forehead without becoming more tense? Can we rest in our own being? Are we comfortable in our own skin? All this is possible. The more we can sense and appreciate the gift of life, the more we can feel peaceful, calm, and tranquil. We also talked about the soul as the true essence of being. I read to you a section last week from Rabbi Harold Kushner's book, Who Needs God? Rabbi Kushner conveyed the idea rather convincingly that the soul is what makes you, you. Your neshama is your essence, your unique, eternal, beautiful self. To nurture your precious soul, you must look past the superficial aspects of daily life and find your true purpose. That is the only thing that will allow us to control our fear and help us to become who we were meant to be. This now brings us to where we left off. But I want to read you one thing first from the other Kushner, Lawrence Kushner, about finding our true purpose. And remember, that was part of the idea of Neshama, is that when we really get in touch with our soul, with our spiritual side, we can turn away from the superficial aspects of life and focus more on what are we here for? What is really our purpose? And Lawrence Kushner has written, he is the spiritual guru of the Reform movement who has introduced us to Hasidic teachings and the teachings of Jewish mysticism and has made them kosher for the Reform movement. I had him as a scholar in residence in two of my congregations. He writes, imagine that your life is a 1,000-piece interlocking jigsaw puzzle set. The goal is to fit all the pieces together and hopefully die at a ripe old age. Now, to make things interesting, no one seems to be issued a complete puzzle. Everyone is missing, on average, about 7 pieces, and these in turn are randomly distributed into other people's puzzles. And so we spend our lives walking around asking one another things like, do you need a piece that's kind of bluish with a little yellow line in the corner? And sooner or later, someone says, my God, I've been looking for that piece my whole life. Here, we reply, I don't know what to do with it. Take it, it's yours. And in this way, we are implicated in one another's lives. Sometimes we don't even realize that we have given or received a puzzle piece from someone until years and decades later, sometimes never, no matter the errand has been completed. So it's the idea, I like this idea in terms of, finding your true purpose in life is kind of like finding your missing puzzle piece. How many of you do jigsaw puzzles? Anybody? Okay. Yeah, I can't put 2 pieces together. I get crazy. It's just one of the things I can't do. But I love the analogy that we're all missing a piece or maybe a few pieces. And I liken that to we have to find our true purpose. We have to find our missing piece. And that could be in other people. We can find our purpose in helping other people, maybe in talking to other people who can help us discover what that purpose is. But it's all about connection. That is so important. All right, so this brings us now to where we left off, and we pick up here with the concept of Bittul, or nothingness. And I believe we started to talk about this at the very end of the class last week. So let me go to the note on that. Okay, and that is right here. Bittul, nothingness. Viktor Frankl, in Man's Search for Meaning, of course, spent years in concentration camps. And one day a man walked up to him and said, I am considering suicide. I no longer have a purpose for living. I don't expect anything from life. And Frankl responded, isn't it possible that life expects something from you? And we talked about the Hasidic rabbi who was visited by a parishioner in the shtetl, and he had business, financial worries, and he told the rabbi what he needs, and the rabbi responded, I'm hearing a lot about what you need, but have you ever considered what you are needed for? The way to fix yourself is not to get what you need, but to give what you are needed for. Each of us has a unique soul but we also have a unique purpose. It is our job and mission to find out what that unique purpose is. So this kind of bleeds over into the last concept of Neshama, our soul, our purpose, and now we have to discover what that purpose is. So we're going to be given a mechanism for doing that, which is called Bittul, nothingness, and I'm going to explain what that is. While modern culture asks, how can I be fulfilled? Jewish wisdom asks, what am I here to do? I spoke about my rabbi I grew up with last week, Herbert Morris, who every morning woke up, looked himself in the mirror and said, so nu, Chaim, what are you going to do today to be a blessing to someone else? Those who don't realize that the key to finding fulfillment lies in giving to others experience what Frankl calls the existential vacuum, which is an internal void that comes about when you cannot clarify what is truly meaningful to you. This void of meaninglessness causes sadness, a lack of purpose, and most of all, anxiety. The feeling that one's life is meaningless often results in one seeking immediate gratification or satisfaction, something that will fill up the emptiness inside. Anything to avoid that terrible feeling of emptiness. And I'm sure that at one time or another, we all, as we age particularly, we have this feeling of what is the purpose of life? We're going to die one day, and what is my life really going to matter in the scheme of eternity? What is the point of all this? What am I here for? And I think an antidote to that stress is when we discover what our true purpose is. And then we realize our life has meaning. Even sometimes, even if your life is meant to help one person at one particular time, that can be enough meaning to sustain you for an entire life. Perhaps that's what you were here to do, to help that one person on that one specific occasion. In that sense, your life has meaning. One of the most important lessons from Jewish wisdom is that feeding the ego is the quickest way to starve the soul. When we do things because they seem impressive or make us look successful, we are missing a chance to pursue our true purpose. Jewish wisdom encourages us to look at our emptiness through a totally different lens and see that what we are feeling is not emptiness after all. It is actually a void that is being filled with the wrong things. And, I hesitate to, I don't want anyone to feel like this is true confessions or anything, but has anyone ever felt that before, that your life was really without purpose or meaning until you discovered that happiness lies in helping others and, feeling that it's not all about us. Remember, I told you about the woman who had her 70th birthday, who had her t-shirts made up, it's all about me. And then I said, and this is my feeling, Judaism is exactly the opposite. It's not all about me. So anyone want to say anything at this point? I'm trying to give you more input into the class, so I'm not lecturing the whole hour. Anybody? Okay. We will go on. When we do things, the Bittul means self-nullification or nothingness. The practice of Bittul is an attempt to empty yourself of yourself, to make space for the divine. I'm going to read that again. This is so important. The practice of Bittul is an attempt to empty yourself of yourself, to make space for the divine. In other words, freeing yourself from yourself. It requires a combination of modesty, humility, and selflessness. Today, in a world that talks so much about self-care, how can emptying yourself instead of filling yourself up help you find fulfillment? But Bittul isn't saying you don't matter. Bittul teaches us that being full of yourself and caring only about yourself, obsessing over what you need in order to make yourself feel good, is often exactly what's getting in the way of living a purposeful life. The idea is that in order to grow, you have to make space inside yourself for something that isn't just about you. It's a mindset shift from I am everything to I am not everything. Lawrence Kushner's book, I Am God and You're Not. Remember, that's why we have the first commandment. God's telling us that God is God and we're not God. When the focus is only on oneself, that does not lead to fulfillment, but rather depression and fear. When the focus is on how one can utilize one's talents and achievements for the benefit of others, then one can start to feel more fulfilled. Now we can look at Frankl's existential vacuum in a new way. The vacuum isn't really emptiness at all. It actually comes from being too full of ourselves. Once this new understanding takes shape, the solution, according to Jewish wisdom, is not to add more, not to endlessly chase personal satisfaction, but to take away. It's not about making the most out of life for ourselves, but about finding out what we can do for others. Now, if you know Hebrew a little bit, the word for I is ani, Aleph, Nun, Yud. If you change the order of those three letters just a little bit, and Jewish sages have done this for years by changing the order of the lettering, they can come up with completely different meanings for words. And this is used for Torah explanation and other texts. So you take the word ani, Aleph, Nun, Yud, and put the Yud in the middle. So it becomes Aleph, Yud, Nun, and you have the word Ein. Ein is nothing. So isn't that interesting? The same letters that talk about I and me and myself also mean nothing. Ein and ani. Sometimes we are something and sometimes we are nothing. Sometimes we are everything and sometimes we are nothing. Confusing? Think about the statement in the Mishnah. One who saves a single life, it's as though they have saved the entire world. Each human being is an entire world. And yet, each human being is nothing if we think only of ourselves. Rabbi Simcha Bunin, a Polish Hasidic leader at the turn of the 19th century, came up with a poignant teaching that gives us balance and perspective. The rabbi taught, consider that you have two pockets. In one pocket, you write on a slip of paper, "For me, the world was created." And in the other pocket, you write on a piece of paper, "I am but dust and ashes." That is one of the most profound teachings. I love it, from Hasidic wisdom. We are nothing on our own, but we are everything when we serve others and a higher cause. Also, these two statements are a way to balance humility with conceit and arrogance. On the one hand, we want to have a healthy self-image. So it's okay to say, "For my sake, the world was created." But if that gets out of balance, we become conceited and arrogant, and it's all about us. So we have to balance that with utter humility and almost a sense of I am nothing. So when you feel too haughty, you take out the piece of paper that says, "I'm but dust and ashes." And if you're feeling like you have a little bit of low self-esteem and your confidence is waning, you pull out the other piece of paper that says, "For my sake, the world was created." And the author said this teaching was so meaningful to her, she actually wrote down these statements on two pieces of paper and kept them in her pockets. We don't have to do that, but it's something to keep in mind. It's a great way to balance a healthy self-image with the proper perspective of humility. Bittul is not a shortcut, an overnight transformation. It's a way of living, and it requires daily work and a real commitment. It transforms the question, "What do I need?" to "What am I needed for?" I am but dust and ashes, unless I am in helping others, in which case, for my sake, the world was created. Accepting the fact that find your purpose through your strengths. And when I say strengths, I mean, not what you're really good at necessarily, but what makes you feel strong. What are the things you do that make you feel in sync, in a zone, as if you were born to do these activities? Think about your family, friends, job, and community. What are the things that you do with them or for them that make you feel strong, in flow, as if you are doing your thing? It's all about discovering your true purpose. Accepting the fact that you can't fully control your life, your relationships, career, health, aging, is one of the greatest ways to manage fear. When you accept that some things are out of your control, you realize that all you can do is to try to do your best to become the person you have the potential to be, obsessing about the promotion you didn't get, the relationship you couldn't find, the friends you couldn't win over, the flaws you think define you. All these require you to change the old recorded messages you play over and over in your head. As my mother would always say, you have to reprogram your thinking. And by the way, my wife pointed out last week, she said, you mentioned your mother so much. Your class participants are going to think you didn't have a father. The fact is, my father passed away when I was 19. So I really, I wasn't able to get to know him that well on an adult level. And my mother, being widowed, and she never remarried, she really got into mental wellness and well-being. And so she would always come up with wise sayings. And one of them was, we have to reprogram our thinking, which I think is very important. So we have to fill emptiness with purpose. Okay, that is Bittul. Now I want to go to a wonderfully profound concept, which is the obverse of Bittul. It is called Tzimtzum. And Tzimtzum, Bittul is emptying the self so you can connect with the divine. And Tzimtzum is the process whereby God emptied God's self. I don't like to say himself. God emptied God's self in order to make room for humanity. So, and I want to explain this to you. It's kind of a difficult concept to grasp. It's a profound concept. It comes from Jewish mysticism, from the great mystical teacher Isaac Luria in the 17th century. And he came up with this story of how the world was created. All right, I'm going to just read this to you, and that's the best way to get a sense of it, and then we can talk about it. This comes from the Eitz Chaim, a Kabbalistic text from the 17th century. Prior to creation, there was only the infinite Or Ein Sof filling all existence. And Or Ein Sof means the light of the unending God. Ein Sof means no end in Hebrew. God has no end, no beginning, no middle. And the Or is the light of the never-ending presence. That's really what it means. All right. So prior to creation, there was only the infinite Or Ein Sof filling all existence. When it arose in God's will to create worlds and emanate the emanated, he contracted, in Hebrew, Tzimtzum. He contracted himself in a point at the center, in the very center of his light. He restricted that light, distancing it to the sides surrounding the central point, so that there remained a void, a hollow empty space away from the central point. After this Tzimtzum, he drew down from the Or Ein Sof a single straight line of light, from his light surrounding the void, from above to below into the void, and it chained down, descending into that void. In the space of that void, he emanated, created, formed, and made the world. So what does this mean? Well, let's try to break it down. So in the beginning, there was nothing but God. It was a massive light that went from one end of the universe to another. And in order to make room for creating the world, God had to contract himself. So there would be a space in which the world could be created. So he took a point at the center and began to create a black void from the center out. And the best analogy from science would be an annular solar eclipse. All right. You know what a total eclipse is? It's when the moon comes perfectly in between the earth and the sun and blocks out all of the sun's light. An annular solar eclipse is when the moon partially blocks the middle of the sun and you can only see a ring of light around the edge. That is an astronomical way of pictorially describing Tzimtzum. God started to contract himself to create a void in the center of his light, and that's where he was able to create the world. So what do we get from that is that in Bittul, we contract the self to make room for God and for others. In Tzimtzum, God contracted himself to make room for the world, and that's a lesson to us. In a way, it's the obverse of each other, but it's also very similar. It's the idea that we still have to contract ourselves in order to make room for others. Now, did you ever see The Life of Pi? This is that story about the young man who was trapped with a tiger in the boat, and they learned to accept each other, and then in the end he gets rescued by a cargo ship, and the name of the cargo ship was Tzimtzum. I couldn't believe it. I thought, most people who see the movie probably thought it was an Asian name, but it's a Hebrew name because the author of The Life of Pi is Jewish. And he stuck that in there to give it a little Jewish tang that he figured nobody except rabbis would be able to figure out. But anyway, think about what Tzimtzum really means. We're so full of ourselves. It's all about us so often we don't even realize it. It's about the ani a lot more than the aim. But think about the times that we have to shine. We have to make our presence known. We live in a culture that tells us we have to show the world how we stand out. When you make a resume for a job, the first thing they tell you is what separates you from the rest of the crowd. What makes you better? What makes you different? Well, Tzimtzum is the opposite. It's about shrinking ourselves to make room for others. Think about all the relationships we have and how so often we try to dominate the relationship, and we try to tell others what they should do. And we may not even be aware of how controlling we can be. But Tzimtzum means in order to have a positive relationship with others, you have to make it about others and not about you. And we do this all the time. When we're in group settings, we try to show how special we are. When we're in social settings, we try to be the life of the party. When we're helping people with problems, family members or friends, we try to share with them our experiences of, well, this is what happened for me, instead of really listening to what their concerns are. So Tzimtzum is all about shrinking ourselves so that we can make room for others. Let me just read you a little bit from the book. Tzimtzum is the practice of contracting yourself to let something else grow in the newly empty space. When God did this, a world was born. Tzimtzum is such an inspiring idea, and it offers us an opportunity to shift the way we think about our presence. It teaches us the power of restraint, and it helps us discover the potential of giving others the space they need. Tzimtzum shows us that if we learn how to take up less space for ourselves and make more space for others, our sense of fulfillment, joy, and meaning doesn't diminish, it increases. Being present with your child, life partner, friend, colleague, or neighbor doesn't mean that you have to take up all the space you can. You don't have to make your presence obvious or dominant. There's another way of bringing ourselves into important relationships. We can actively and deliberately choose to take up less space, to contract ourselves at certain times and make space for others by limiting something of ourselves, our influence, our control. I took a class, I signed up for it was over a 2-year program at the Institute of Jewish Spirituality, and 50 rabbis came together twice a year for 4 or 5 days in a retreat, and we engaged in different spiritual practices. And at the beginning of these sessions, we all sat around in a circle and we introduced ourselves. And right away, you could tell the people who were trying to make an impression. It was the ones who tried to make everybody laugh, or they were affected. And they're the ones. It's all about me. Look at me. I'm great, and you should like me because of this reason. And they were the ones trying to stand out. But you could also tell the ones who had greater equanimity, who were at peace with themselves, and they didn't need to brag about who they are and what they do, and they didn't need to try to make people laugh because they understood the concept of Tzimtzum, and it wasn't all about them. And let's face it, the best relationships we can have with people are when we stop long enough to listen to what someone else is trying to tell us instead of trying to think of what we're going to say to them after they're done speaking. How many of you are guilty of that? You're thinking of your response before someone's even finished talking, because you don't want to seem like, you don't have something wise to say in response. Tzimtzum is all about listening, being present for the other. And I did my rabbinic thesis on Martin Buber and his theory of I, it, I, thou. When we treat others as an it, they're there for our purposes, and we only see them in terms of ourself. When we treat someone as a thou, we're truly present for them, and we're trying to hear everything that they're trying to tell us. And Buber tells the story of how a young man who was suicidal came to visit him, and he poured out his heart to him, but Buber was too busy thinking about what he had to do that day, so he was only listening with one ear. And later the young man actually did carry out the evil deed. He committed suicide, and Buber never got over the guilt because he didn't take the time to contract, to practice Tzimtzum, to really listen to what is this young man trying to tell me, and how can I be of help? So think about that. Tzimtzum, contracting yourself, and having a sense of humility, so we can really listen to what others are saying. All right. How much time do we have left, Paulette? What is the time that we're dealing with right now? And you're muted.
Hi, sorry. We have 15 minutes.
Okay, very good. I'd like to show some. What I've done now is I have some other things that I want to share with you. They're not in the book, but these are other ways that we can have some practices in which to deal with stress and anxiety. And I was able to create a little paradigm with the 7 blessings of the Amida, so we can remember them. And the first for sure, well, if you know the prayer book at all, during the week we have the 18 blessings, the Shmona Esrei, which is the central part of the service. And the first 3 are about praise of God. The the middle 12 are petitions, asking God for things, and the last 3 are they're prayers of thanksgiving and peace. But on Shabbat, we don't offer any petitionary prayers. We try not to ask God for things on the Sabbath, but we try to be rather than to want. So the 12 petitionary blessings on the Sabbath get replaced with one special blessing for the Sabbath. So we're going to look at these 7 blessings and come up with different ways to deal with stress. The first three, as I said, are about God. You know the Avot ve'imahot. They're about the generations, the gods of our ancestors, the God of our ancestors. The second prayer is Gvurot, about God's power. And the third blessing, Kedushat Hashem, is about God's holiness. So the first 3 prayers are about God. And let me just find a note here I need to share with you. God is one of the key ideas of Jewish wisdom, is that we are part of a reality that is much greater and wiser than we can imagine. The world that we perceive with our 5 senses is only a cover, a veneer, concealing a far deeper and more profound reality which lies beneath the surface. That reality is God, who is Ribono Shel Olam, master of the universe. God is the Ein Sof, the eternal being without beginning or end. God is as close to us as breathing, and yet at the same time is as mysterious, complex, and inscrutable as the concept of infinity itself. We live in an evidence-based world where we are asked to show and prove things. If we can't prove it, it must not be true. But just because you can't see something doesn't mean it's not there. That's kind of how I feel about the Supreme Being. That's why we call it faith, because faith cannot be proven. We simply have to believe. And I know that belief is probably harder than it's ever been at this time with COVID. After all, how can a God who is in control of things allow this insidious disease to claim the lives of so many innocent people? Perhaps faith in God at this time is as difficult as it was during the Holocaust. I don't know. What I do know is that I see more people questioning the role of God in the world now than I have ever seen in the course of my entire career. But that is what faith is. a constant questioning without the assurance of ready answers. Yes, in spite of it all, I still believe in a God who is in charge. Maybe a God who cannot control evil or illness or disease or natural disasters, but a God who is there for us in times of trouble. The psalmist in Psalm 121 looks to the mountains and asks if there is a source of help, relief, release. The answer is simple. Help is available from a higher power, from a perspective that is larger, deeper, and more sustaining than the voice of our distress. Judaism teaches that we are never alone. No matter how separate we feel at a given moment, we can turn our hearts towards Ribbono Shel Olam, the power of the universe that's beneath and beyond, yet so near to us, the source of all life, the energy which fills the universe, the presence that guides our steps, the unchanging truth that sustains us amid all the changes of life. So we're going to take a look now at some texts from Scripture that reassure us of God's presence in our lives, especially during times of stress, anxiety, uncertainty, and fear. All right? So Paulette, I'll ask you now to go to the text that we've prepared for today. We're going to flash those up on the screen. All right.
Can you see it now? Sorry.
Yes, I can. Let's go to the first one. All right, from Psalm 56, and this is a psalm written by King David. Life wasn't easy for David, the man anointed by Samuel as the next king of Israel. While attempting to escape from jealous King Saul, who wanted to kill him, David was seized by the Philistines in Gath. David wrote Psalm 56 during this difficult situation. And I'll read. For the leader, upon Jonath Elam Rehokim of David, Michtam, when the Philistines took him in Gath. Be gracious unto me, O God, for man would swallow me up. All the day fighting oppressed me. They that lie in wait for me would swallow me up all the day, for they are many that fight against me. O Most High, in the day that I am afraid, I will put my trust in thee. So it's that last line that I really want to focus. In the day that I am afraid, I will put my trust in thee. Let me ask you a question. How many of you, when you have become afraid, you look to God for help and you believe that God is there for you? Can anyone talk about that kind of experience? None of you have ever looked to God for help?
Oh, I will.
Thank you.
Yes, my natural instinct is say, oh God, please help me. But I realize that I'm the only one who can help me. I mean, I still believe there's a God there, but physically, in the place I am, I'm the only one that can help myself. But God gives me the strength to help myself.
Okay. That's what I was going to ask you. Is what do you think some of those reservoirs of strength may come? Believe that God can give you that.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Let's take a look at the second part of Psalm 56. Because of iniquity, cast them out. In anger, bring down the peoples, O God. Thou hast counted my wanderings. Put thou my fears into thy bottle, my tears into thy bottle. Are they not in thy book? Then shall mine enemies turn back in the day that I call. This I know, that God is for me. In God I will praise his word. In the Lord I will praise his word. In God do I trust. I will not be afraid. What can man do unto me? Thy vows are upon me, O God. I will render thank offerings unto thee. The power of God is so infinitely great, above what any person can do to us. If we truly believe in God and that we believe God watches over us and protects us, then what do we have to be afraid of? Do any of you believe that God protects you from danger? I do. And as irrational as it may seem, in a world where many good people die unjustly, whether it's at the hands of other human beings or from illness or disease, I don't know, it's not rational, but I still believe God watches out for me. Maybe not all the time, because things do happen, but I can tell you lots of times where I escaped danger or escaped a Mitzrayim, a narrow place, and I believe God was there for me. Does anyone else feel like that? Or are we just rational Reformed Jews who really aren't quite sure what God can do in this world of evil and bad things that happen far too often? No one? All right, well, let's move on to the next text. The fear of man bringeth a snare, but whoso putteth his trust in the Lord shall be set on high. So if we can bring ourselves to trust in God, that God is there for us, God is able to quell all of our fears. And this is from Proverbs. Next text. The Lord hath established his throne in the heavens, and his kingdom ruleth over all. I have a lot more text than what we're going to have time for today. I wanted to go to a specific one. Let's scroll through them, Paulette, until I get to the one that I want. Keep going. All right, stop right there. Not this one. Let's go another one. Keep going. Then came the word of the Lord unto Jeremiah, saying, Behold, I am the Lord, the God of all flesh. Is there anything too hard for me? So if you truly believe in the power of God, then nothing is impossible. All right, next slide. Okay, move on to the next one. Okay, keep going. Here we go. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the All-Holy is understanding. For by me thy days shall be multiplied, and the years of thy life shall be increased. Now, I'm not much into, in terms of God fearing, I don't like the fear of the Lord. That's a phrase that I have a little difficulty with. But if you look at the Hebrew word for fear, which is norah, norah can also mean awe. And I much prefer to it as to think of the awe of the Lord. If we are in awe of God's power, in awe of God's abilities, that is the beginning of wisdom. And if we don't feel that, and if we feel that our limited human mind can comprehend all the secrets of the universe, then I think that we are unable to live in awe of God, and that's to our detriment. And I'm going to end with a text that we don't have up here today, so we can, Paulette, we can go back to the screen with the participants. This is all familiar to us. It's the concluding hymn at the end of the Shabbat service, Adon Olam. We all know Adon Olam. We know the words in Hebrew, but I wonder, when was the last time you really looked at what it means? I think it summarizes exactly what we're trying to say about the power of God to reduce our anxiety and stress. Listen to the translation. You are our eternal God, who reigned before any being had been created. When all was done according to your will, then you were called ruler. And after all ceases to be, you alone will rule in majesty. You have been, are yet, and will be in glory. There's the idea of the Ein Sof, the never ending, from infinity to infinity. And you are one, none other can compare to or consort with you. You are without beginning, without end. To you belong power and dominion. And you are my God, my living Redeemer, my rock in times of trouble and distress. You are my standard bearer and my refuge, my benefactor when I call on you. Into your hands I entrust my spirit when I sleep and when I wake, and with my spirit, my body also. Adonai is with me, and I shall not fear. Sometimes in meditation, we encourage people to say a mantra, a phrase that gives them comfort. And I love this one. Adonai is with me, and I shall not fear. Adonai li velo ira. For whether you say it in Hebrew or in English. Adonai li velo ira. Adonai is with me, and I shall not fear. Just to say that over and over again anytime we're feeling anxious, and to see if that can dispel some of our stress. I think that is an excellent way, an excellent spiritual practice to engage in. All right, I'm going to stop here, and we're going to pick up next week with a continuation of looking at the rest of the blessings in the Amida about Shabbat and the importance of having a day of rest. About the next one is avodah, or work, which I consider for the purposes of this class, finding your purpose in life, the practice of gratitude, and finally, the blessing of peace. These are the rest of the blessings of the Amida. We will pick up with that, not next week, 2 weeks from today on January 24th. All right? Thank you all, and please spread the word about the class if you're enjoying it and you find it helpful. I think this can be of benefit to more than 7 people, and like I said, there were several people today who could not make the class, but we hope we'll see a larger number in a couple of weeks. But thank you for you are my ever faithful, and I appreciate your support of this class, and I hope you're gaining a lot out of it. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Stay well and be healthy. Take care, everyone.